Hello, and welcome to another video for ICMI21. I'm here with Vernon today, and we have a very special guest, Brother K. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, doing great. Honored to be here.
And before we really get into the interview, some people may not be familiar with you, probably because they've been living under a rock because you're so popular, but can you give us a brief about who you are and what you do?
My name is Brother K, and obviously that's not my birth name. I actually did change my name about, I believe it was 35 years ago in 1986. I went to court. I changed my name because of circumcision. I first protested against circumcision in 1980 at the California State Capitol in Sacramento, and feel very passionately about this issue that infant circumcision, male genital mutilation, newborn male genital mutilation, is a crime against the child and against the man he becomes. We in the United States are particularly unfortunate to be the only English-speaking nation whose doctors have endorsed and practiced this cruel surgery in the 21st century. I've been in this movement for over 40 years. I started talking against circumcision people in Southern California in the mid-1970s. I feel just as strongly today, even stronger, that it's time to put an end to it. It's time for American men to stand up, speak out, and put an end to what was done to us in the cradle. And this will benefit not only American men in the future, but the genital mutilation of children. People who oppose female circumcision have segregated it by gender and claim that it's not the same issue as male genital mutilation. That is incorrect. That was a political decision that certain people made to throw boys to the wolves because they had to make concessions to get those who support male genital mutilation. They had to make concessions to get their support to end female genital mutilation. So I do think that we can say without ambiguity, we don't have to qualify it. The genital mutilation of children is the greatest human rights issue in the 21st century. And it's our job to end it. I don't generally like to call men wimps, but I can say that to me, if a man claims that he's glad he's circumcised, he's a broken man. And you can say he's a wimp. There's a bottom line to what a man should or can accept as acceptable. And when he's been a victim of this atrocity, there's a lot of psychological obstacles to seeing it and to acknowledging it. So when I say it's a broken man, he's still a broken man. While I can understand that he doesn't want to accept it, the problem with not accepting it, acknowledging it, looking into it, is that it becomes a self-perpetuating, socially perpetuated crime against the children. Because the ramifications of a man not accepting it are that he tolerates it for his own sons or as an institution in society. And genital mutilation of children, whether it's a boy or a girl, is sexual abuse of that child. It should not be a political football, as unfortunately the opponents of female circumcision have made it, so that we are still presented with a situation that male victims of genital cutting as children are largely ignored in the human rights community.
That's a common criticism on the part of detractors of activism, that we're trying to say that MGM is the same impact on children as FGM, right? But they say, no, it's not. Female genital mutilation is really different. How would you explain that MGM and FGM are essentially the same crime?
The problem is that it often becomes a contest of who suffers the most. Do boys suffer more from genital mutilation, or do girls suffer more from genital mutilation? And that's an unfortunate contest to create, that we have to prove that boys also suffer from genital mutilation. We know that girls suffer from genital mutilation. Actually, the most common female circumcision is done in the most populous Muslim nation in the world, Indonesia. And that is a tiny piece of the clitoral hood is cut off, or in some cases just scraped. Now, we could say that that is really not that big a deal. In fact, they call it a tiny cut in Indonesia. And that is the most common female circumcision. We are against the genital mutilation of all children. all children. What is done to boys, the complete amputation of the foreskin, compared to the most common female circumcision, is grotesquely off the charts. As I said, it's not a contest of suffering, but there is visual evidence that the genital mutilation of boys is more severe than the most common genital mutilation of girls. And I should add that cutting off any part of a child's genital, it is just cruel beyond belief, barbaric. The people that practice female circumcision also practice male circumcision. Female circumcision cannot exist without male circumcision. The opponents of female circumcision who think they're going to be able to end female circumcision by ignoring male circumcision are fighting the wrong battle. They have to fight child genital mutilation, not just favor one gender over the other. We have to stop the genital mutilation of all children. It is a human rights issue for children.
Going along with that whole competition, we certainly hear about what negative impacts FGM have on females, which I agree with you. This is a human rights issue across the board. But what we don't really hear too much about, especially as males are like, hey, I got it, nothing wrong with me. But what sort of social, psychological, and physical effects do boys experience as a result of circumcision?
Scholars have written entire books on that very issue. It is huge, huge. So let's break it down. All right, let's start with social effects. There is strong motivation for society to tell American men to accept the genital mutilation that was committed on our bodies when we were newborns. On social media, you will see that when men speak out against infant circumcision, they're shamed. They're told to get over it. They're told that you're all alone on this. The social pressure on men to accept it, that's the problem. I have seen firsthand testimony that some doctors actually, when they're trying to pressure parents into signing a consent form to circumcise their sons, the doctor will turn to the dad and say, "Are you circumcised?" And the dads are caught off balance and say, well, yeah. And then the doctor says, well, then your son really should look like you. These American doctors are really playing an ugly game. 100 years ago, most of the dads were intact, not circumcised. Doctors didn't have that same explanation that the child should look like the father because the fathers were all intact. It's a big issue, the social effect of infant circumcision on a man. When you grow up and you find out that you were sexually mutilated in the cradle, it's an issue of pride. It's very, very galling for a man to acknowledge that part of his penis was cut off. That's the social in a nutshell. The sexual is across the board, the most damaging. When they circumcise a man, they cut off the covering of the head of the penis. By nature, the head of the penis actually is an internal organ. Women can understand this by pointing out that the clitoral hood is the covering of the clitoris. And when I say to women, they always cringe when I say, can you imagine living life without your clitoral hood? And women universally, I haven't met one woman who didn't cringe at even the idea of living life without her clitoral hood, because women use the clitoral hood to masturbate. They are able to manipulate it with just a few touches of their fingers and rub it against the clitoris for that pleasure. Well, it's the same with an intact man. Intact men are able to masturbate with manipulating the foreskin over the head of the penis. Once you cut that off, and this actually is the diabolical genius or diabolical stupidity of infant circumcision. Once you cut off a man's foreskin, he no longer can masturbate easily. So circumcised men have to develop a new way to masturbate, and that's what is well known among intactivists as the death grip. It changes the whole way that you get satisfaction, and it also changes the sexual interaction between a man and a woman. The inside of a woman's vagina has microscopic ridges that run one way. In the same way that you cannot pet a cat's fur against a grain, Inside a woman's vagina are tiny ridges that grip a man's foreskin during sex. And so that when the man does the in and out movements with his penis is kept in place by these ridges that grasp the man's foreskin on the outward stroke, so that the interior of the man's penis is actually moving inside his own foreskin and not causing friction against the woman's vagina. Women don't understand that the reason why they're so often sore after sex with a circumcised man is because he doesn't have the foreskin in place to reduce friction. And it fucks up masturbation, and it fucks up sex between the man and the woman. And when I referred to the diabolical genius of circumcision, it actually did change the way men and women have sex, and it changed the way men have to masturbate. It's grotesque.
It does seem to be that the intent male genital mutilation is to mitigate his sexual pleasure. Do you have any insight as to why this historical societal hate towards male sexuality in this way?
American doctors introduced circumcision specifically to prevent boys from masturbating. And it did work. Up to a point, it did work. Boys without a foreskin cannot masturbate as easily as boys who have a foreskin. And there's anecdotal evidence, and if scientists will probably find it in their research as well, that the onset of masturbatory activity is probably earlier in intact boys than circumcised boys. I know myself, when I found out about masturbation when I was in 7th grade, and some guy said, let's go across the street and jerk off each other. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, you tug on your penis. And I said, well, no, I don't want to do that. I was 7th grade, just going through puberty. But in the shower that night, I tried to, what he called tugging on your penis. I couldn't figure out what the hell he meant. He probably had a foreskin, I'm figuring, because he made it sound so easy. I myself didn't learn to masturbate until, I believe, later that year as a 7th grade boy. Whereas I do believe that intact boys do learn to masturbate earlier because it's so easy. It's just a few movements of the fingertips manipulating the foreskin over the head of the penis. But American doctors made no bones about it. They introduced circumcision to stop boys from masturbating, and they also punished boys. Parents would bring them in, they catch their boys masturbating. Doctors called it a punishment. This is all documented in the literature. You can actually see this book on Project Gutenberg by Peter Remondino, who was a very respected physician at the time. He wrote a whole book. I believe it's called The History of Circumcision. But if you look up Project Gutenberg, Circumcision, Remondino, this is about 120 years ago. He made no bones about it. Circumcision would stop boys from masturbating. And they viewed masturbation as a great evil.
So
I hope I answered your question, Vernon.
You did, yes. Definitely attest to some, being one of those rare intact men myself, I can kind of attest to some of the things you've said. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, congratulations. Where were you born?
Japan, actually. But my father was a United States citizen born abroad. But here's the thing, like, he did tell me, actually, that, even though he was not asked if I was going to get a circumcision or not, he said that if he were asked, he wouldn't have done it anyway because he didn't believe in it. So that's some miracle.
But were you born in an American hospital?
I don't believe so, no. It was in Japan.
Right. And you know then that Japan never adopted this insane circumcision.
Absolutely not.
So Japanese men are intact.
Yes.
Just like most Asian men, those born in India, China. It's only when you start getting into the Muslim countries, then they adopted the circumcision of boys and girls. It was considered a mark of Muslim culture.
what we're primarily talking about is male genital mutilation, but I want to ask you a question about female genital mutilation, because again, we're across the board on this, but we're going back to Kellogg. Kellogg was the one who really pushed forward with this idea of circumcision, but he also pushed forward with the idea of female genital mutilation, of trying to remove the clit or use acid on the clit.
Yes.
Why do you think that didn't catch on like male circumcision did?
It actually did catch on to a limited extent, particularly in the American Midwest. There have been some women who have written books and articles about being circumcised back in the 1950s. I think American culture in general protects girls from such fiendish ideas more than they would protect boys. And because it's in the Bible, it's very, very unfortunate that there's a biblical endorsement of infant circumcision. Really cruel, unbelievable. Circumcision in the Bible is just so bound up with cruelty and treachery and deceit. There's one story where they circumcised 200 men in a village by promising that if they agreed to circumcise, they could marry the beautiful daughter of a king or something. And then while the men were healing from their circumcision, they went in and killed them all. Circumcision is an act of warfare. It's an act of conquest, and the Bible makes that very clear. Leonard Glick has written a book called Circumcision from, I believe his book is From Ancient Judea to Modern Times. And he shows how circumcision morphed from a religious commandment into essentially a medical commandment. I've often wondered how Leonard Glick got interested in circumcision itself, but he was the attending physician at the draft physical for Elvis Presley back in the late 50s. And Elvis Presley was an intact man. And I am curious why he got interested in circumcision after his stint as an army doctor. But the Bible, there was no circumcision in Christianity. They slugged it out back in the days of the Apostle Paul. So all the popes were intact. All the Christian peoples of Europe were and still are intact. European Christians never adopted infant circumcision, nor do they believe that the Old Testament commandment from Genesis 17 applies to Christianity. American Christians have followed many, many twisted paths over the years, and in some cases, very, very unfortunate paths. And one of them is that some fundamentalists believe that they should obey the Old Testament, negating really the sacrifice of Christ himself, whose sacrifice on the cross was to end blood sacrifices for all time. Christ was meant to be the last blood sacrifice for people who believe in Christianity.
So was it really just the relatively recent trickery of the lie of medical benefits? Was that why parents so readily send their own children to be mutilated?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If they hadn't come up with medical benefits, circumcision of boys would not have caught on had they not created, after the fact, these so-called medical benefits, which are preposterous and insane, really. The circumcision fanatics in the American medical industry, they literally will say anything. They even claim that when you circumcise an American boy, you are helping protect him from HIV. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's insane.
So the flip side of Vernon's question about why parents did it, I want to tell you a hypothesis I have, which I have some links that kind of show this, but I want to get your reaction to it.
Okay.
I believe that the medical community has continued this practice and made up any excuse to keep doing it, not as a means to help boys as they claim, but because it's a financial incentive that they can sell the foreskin for medical research and cosmetics companies. How do you feel about that?
I agree 100%. There is a dual motive among American penis cutters, and the financial. It's hard to weigh the ideological or the financial in balance to each other, but there is no doubt that the financial is a huge, huge motivation for hospitals, for doctors, because it's very profitable. I've seen estimates that the circumcision, all its related industries, including the recycling of foreskins in the biotech, that it's a $1 to $2 billion, and also recircumcision, second circumcision, botched circumcision, that it's a $1 to $2 billion industry, and that's more than serious money.
So to shift gears a bit, what is foreskin restoration, and can it help a man who was circumcised as a child?
Yes. Foreskin restoration, I have to say, I've always been a believer in it. But on my personal journey, it's been really remarkable for me. I first heard about foreskin restoration in the early 80s after I did my protests against circumcision. The early information I got about foreskin restoration, you had to use tape. I tried it and it was very painful. And honestly, that soured me against trying it for myself. I wish I knew then what I know now. Fortunately, I talked to an Oklahoma City man about 2 years ago, and he said, "Have you tried foreskin restoration?" I said, "Well, no, I don't really have enough to work with." Because, I mean, I got the typical American cut, which is, your glands is totally denuded. So, but he didn't just accept my answer, and I'm glad he didn't. He said, "Can you pucker? Can you pucker the skin that you do have left? Can you pucker it over the head of your penis?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, then you can restore." And then he explained to me what he called manual tugging, which is where you pucker the skin over the head of your penis and you just gently tug on it for about 10 or 15, 20 minutes a day. So I got home from that tour. That was early November of 2019, so not quite 2 years ago. And it was like a miracle. Within several days, I started seeing progress. It was microscopic progress, but having been familiar with my own penis for 70 years at that point, even over 70 years, I'll be 74 in October. So I ordered a dual tension restore, the DTR, and got that in the mail. I've been restoring now for almost 2 years, and the progress is quite remarkable. I now have full coverage of my glands, and I'm continuing to make progress. So I have to encourage men to never count yourself out. I know I've been in contact with some men who really suffered devastating circumcisions. I'm lucky by comparison, and the average man is lucky by comparison. Some of these men are left with no skin even below the glands, just about nothing. But they too can restore. There's a lot of resources available for men. You can go to norm.org. That's NORM.org, National Organization of Restoring Men. And there are devices and the devices are all very reasonable. I think my DTR was about $90. You can get a restoring device for $100 or less, but you can do a lot with manual tugging. Google manual tug, Foreskin manual tugging. There's a lot of resources out there, but I have to say, yes, I wish I had known how easy it is. The pioneers of foreskin restoration, we owe them a debt of gratitude for leading the way. That they have done amazing work. It's not perfect. It's taken away a lot of my anger. It absolutely has, and my personal well-being, my comfort. I mentioned earlier how women cringe when I say, "Can you imagine living without your clitoral hood?" And they cringe. Well, that's what men have to live with the head of their penis exposed. So I have gotten quite a bit of enhanced well-being by having the head of my penis covered now instead of exposed. So yeah, I'm a firm believer, proponent, and supporter of foreskin restoration. All men can do it. The earlier you start, the better off you're going to be. And try manual tugging. You will be amazed. You will be amazed.
I will honestly say that listening to you talk today, I mean, I've always felt this way, but I've just been repeating it over and over in my mind. It's like, I wish I had a foreskin. I was unfortunate in that regard, but I'm going to try these recommendations for restoration.
Absolutely. It will amaze you, Chris. It really will. James Lowen referred to it as alchemy. It really is like magic. It does work. The hardest part, I would think, for a man is to get through the first month or 2, 3 months. Give it a couple of weeks, give it a month, give it 2 months. You will see progress. It's a phenomenon called mitosis. Cells divide and grow, and any man can do it.
I will definitely look into it and probably start tonight.
Absolutely. There's no reason. Don't overdo it. I mean, it should never hurt. It should never hurt. And I was very, very cautious. I took it close to hurting, but didn't. There's no reason for it to hurt. And if you hurt, it'll dissuade you from doing it. I don't know if it can actually damage. It probably can damage you, but it doesn't need to hurt. It shouldn't hurt. But just pucker what you have. Pucker what you have over the head of your penis, and you can sort of squeeze it, stretch it, spread it. I mean, you'll figure it out. It's probably different for every man, but it's like magic.
So that's great. And I'm like completely sold on it. I'm going to definitely try it out. But I want to switch gears here, and
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the recent things that you've done. You have billboards up now, and you were recently on Tosh.0 talking about circumcision, which was a complete shock to me that they would even allow that on TV. Can you tell us about your experience with doing either of those?
Yes. Well, the billboards have been a remarkable development that came out of the COVID crisis, where Bloodstained Men has not been able to tour for the last year, and we were trying to think of what could we do to continue our outreach to the American people, and we run fundraisers for them, and the Intactivist community has come through. Our most expensive billboard, but these billboards are expensive. We had a billboard up on an interstate in Cincinnati for 6 weeks, and that cost us $9,200. And I mean, that hurts, but it reached millions of people and saved a lot of boys. We have a billboard going up in Buffalo, New York. That was actually going to be up for 10 weeks. We raised that money through a fundraiser. You can go on Facebook and see Bloodstained Men and their friends on Facebook. That's where we run our fundraisers. We're a nonprofit charity, so donations are tax exempt. The Tosh.0 interview, Comedy Central contacted Bloodstained Men and said they would like to interview me. And obviously we were very, very flattered and honored to do that. And they flew me down to Hollywood. They put me up for the night. Tosh is an amazing man. I sat down and they filmed for several hours. There were a lot of things that we talked about. I can tell you that I hope that someday Daniel Tosh will tell his story of circumcision. I don't think I'm at liberty to reveal everything he said to me, but I can tell you that he has a gruesome, heartbreaking story of his own to tell. And this issue means a lot to him.
So speaking of reaching millions, in terms of persuading people, do you have any insight into convincing and persuading these mothers and fathers who already arranged for the mutilation of their sons? How do we tell them basically that what they've done is wrong? And have you seen any success in trying to persuade these people?
That is a challenge. It is a real challenge. We're doing that every day on social media. That's what a large part of my work on Facebook and Twitter is. One benefit of finding circumcision posts, there are two kinds of posts that we go in on or share. Someone says, I'm circumcising my son tomorrow. I really feel uneasy about this. And we'll find that post and we'll go in on it and comment on it. Or someone says, my son was circumcised this morning. I feel like shit. And we'll go in on that post. There are several theories of how to do that, and several branches of Intactivists who have utilized the different theories to comment on these social media posts. I think that the accumulation of all our work works together. I think that we need all kinds of Intactivists, and I'm not what's called an intacto cop. I do oppose shaming and condemning regret moms, which is something we can talk about as a separate issue. But to convince parents not to circumcise before it happens is probably easier than convincing them that circumcision was a mistake after they've done it. On a positive note, when Intactivists get on these posts and comment, all of their friends are seeing this dialogue or battle. The beauty of social media is that it's not just you and the person who has posted, but it's everyone on their friends list who is seeing their post and everyone on their friends list who is commenting on that post. So it gets quite interesting. It's really like this great ongoing debate and argument. And it involves all kinds of persuasion, shaming, educating, everything that's in the arsenal of human behavior. We're seeing it on social media. And the other side is doing the same thing. They're trying to shame us. They're trying to disgrace us. I had one woman who, I mean, this is ironic. Her name is Denise McAllister, and she's on Twitter. And she wrote a book called Everything Men Want to Tell You, But Don't or Won't. And she actually joined in some circumcision post, and she said, "Men, get over it." And oh, I mean, we had a field day with her. I believe she recently blocked me. We point out to women their hypocrisy. And yeah, I mean, we go after the women. We're going after the men. We're going after the men for being wimps, and we're going after the women for being hypocrites. So, I mean, it's war. Activism is war, but we didn't start it. Circumcision declared war on American men. It declared war on us when we were newborns, and we're taking it back to them now. Now we're going after them. And no, it's not pretty. I'm not going to say that I agree with every tactic that I see out there. It's all part of what's going on. It's real. Circumcision of baby boys is literally a crime against that future man. It is criminal. It is criminal behavior. We're going after the doctors. When we get wind of a doctor that has posted about in favor of circumcision, we go after him. You know, we're not going to be polite about it. We're going to call them out, and we're going to get people to expose them. That's what war is. We're going after the bad guys, and the people that are circumcising children, the doctors, and the people that are supporting it, the parents, we're going after them. We're not going to let, they don't get a free pass just because they're poor parents. No. It's war.
One thing we don't really hear too much about, which might actually shock some people, is that circumcision of children, but boys in this context, can lead to death. Can you fill us in more about that?
Yes, absolutely. It is shocking. We do know that at least 100 boys a year, and probably more, die from bleeding and infections after circumcision. Parenthetically, I should add that many other boys actually lose their penises or lose the head of their penis. But the deaths are hard to pin down because hospitals have a protocol. They will never list circumcision as the cause of death. So they will always list bleeding or infection as the cause of death. And so there are no statistics kept. But occasionally parents post about these deaths on Facebook or on other social media. Some of the cases make the national media. I'll give you an example. There was a famous HIV case back in the 80s. Ryan White was his name. And he died because of circumcision. Now, circumcision is not the official cause of his death. He died of HIV. How did Ryan White get HIV? Because he almost bled to death after circumcision. So they gave him a blood transfusion. And I believe that was before they were checking or before they knew how to check donated blood for HIV. And so Ryan White, who became the poster boy of HIV, and I've actually posted about this, he died because of circumcision, but you're not going to hear that on the national media. You're going to hear that he died of HIV. He would not have died of HIV if he hadn't been circumcised and needed that blood transfusion.
That's rather spine-chilling.
Yeah, it is. They don't test newborn boys for hemophilia. They don't test them. So they use, I mean, it sounds really weird, but circumcision is the unofficial test for hemophilia. Girls have a very, very slow rate of hemophilia, so it's mostly boys. And so there are unknown boys, and probably many of them with hemophilia, who bleed to death from circumcision every year. And there are hemophilia Facebook groups, and many of them say, oh, thank God, circumcision uncovered. The poor boy almost bled to death, but the parents try to find the silver lining. They say, well, thank God he was circumcised. We found out he has hemophilia. That boy would not have died from hemophilia. I'm sure it would have been discovered, in the normal course of things. but that's the nature of parents. I mean, as parents, we hate to make mistakes, and circumcision is the worst mistake a parent can make, honestly, for their son.
Well, I think that's going to be about covered for us. Thank you so much, Brother K. I mean, really, I do a lot of research on a wide variety of topics, circumcision especially, but I learned something new. I've learned a lot of new things today. So you are a wealth of information. And I thank you for coming out this year for ICMI.
Absolutely. It's been an honor being here in my second year with the International Conference on Men's Issues. And keep it up. That's our job as men, is to protect the children. Honestly, that is the number one job for men. Protect all children from genital mutilation. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Vernon. It's been an honor being here and talking to you.
It was a pleasure speaking with you today.